Dr. Sebastian Gorka is with me. Dr. G, good morning.
Good morning, Alex.
So you're someone who, because you're a Breitbartian, you know that we always try to break down the policy and try to get into the detail as much as possible and then back out and explain why the media screwed it up. That seems to be the pattern virtually not just every hour of every show, but every segment of every show seems to cover this. I've never seen such a stark example of with the hysteria, with the hysterical nature of the media as we're witnessing right now with this border news cycle.
No, absolutely. But I think you summarized it very well in your intro. This is an act of desperation, in my opinion, because they have nothing else that they can talk about. What are they? It's fascinating to watch how there's no coverage, literally none, of the president's historic summit in Singapore. Already, it's a non-issue. And they can't talk about it because it is historic. They can't talk about national security in general, whether it's ISIS, whether it's revitalizing NATO. They can't talk about the economy, and they can't talk about record employment figures here in the United States. So what do they have to do? They have to use a photograph from the era of the Obama administration and blame the Trump White House for a policy that was actually enacted by President Bush. So it's classic Alinsky. It's narrative in front of or in place of the truth, and that's the tactics that they're going to use all the way up to November. But my sense is, I haven't polled this. I haven't gone outside of the bubble since the hysteria began. But I sense, the American people either see through it or just ignore it, because they realize that, when they look at their paycheck, when they look at the really historic things that are happening, that they understand that this is classic left-wing demagoguery.
Yeah, I think so. And Brandon, you were the one who originally broke these photos back in the day. And could you describe your reaction when you saw that these photos that you broke, that you put so much effort into getting these stories and fleshing them out for people, explaining what's actually happening, providing the context all these years ago, ignored by these people who are trying to blame these photos on President Trump? It must have been a surreal moment for you.
Very much so. Yeah. I always think that at this point, I'm 41 and I can't be shocked. I've lived too much. And then, you know what? I always get shocked. I'm always shocked by it because I do think there's a lot of dishonesty. Like I said, there's two separate issues going on. There's separations, which I think is being handled unfairly by media. And then there's also, like I said, the emergency triage processing centers, which is what our photos depicted, which is what a lot of the current photos people are getting depict, and it's they're just not the same thing. But media is intentionally, like right now I'm watching headlines on the major news channels about toddlers separated, and then they keep flashing photos of those immediate triage processing centers, which is completely dishonest, but they're doing it. So yeah, it's very shocking to me to see this, but I keep thinking that they can't shock me, and then they do.
Yeah, and Dr. G, you're someone who's been falsely called a Nazi just simply because you're a influential person in the Trump ecosystem. And now you're seeing President Trump and the people who are enforcing these laws that are on the books, trying their best to enforce it as Nazis yet again. Joel Pollak called this a form of anti-Semitism, and I happen to agree with him. This cheapens the Holocaust in such a horrendous way. It cheapens what it means to be a Nazi. If separating children temporarily from people who are probably not their parents and giving them pizza and blankets and education and field trips to the zoo is the same of putting people in concentration camps, then putting people in concentration camps is utterly meaningless.
Yeah, first things first, can I just, I haven't been formally part of the Breitbart family since I left to work in the White House, but I really want to give recognition to and doff my cap to Brandon, the work that he's done on the border and immigration for years now. It really must be recognized. And also the fire support that Joel Pollak has done by going down there and going to these facilities in the last few days. There is no other coverage like it, so I really want to congratulate both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, this issue is, look, somebody needs to write this book. I don't know if somebody at Breitbart can do it, or if somebody, in our, what did you call it, the Trump ecoverse wants to do this. This is the strange Alice in Wonderland kind of dystopian world that we live in, when a man whose daughter and grandchildren are Orthodox Jews,
Yes,
is accused of being an anti-Semite, and all his team are, as far as I know, I never discussed it with him, but Stephen Miller, as far as I know, is ethnically Jewish, and he's being accused of being a Nazi. The fact that the former NSA and CIA director, General Hayden, has the gall, has the temerity to use photographs of Birkenau to criticize this administration. This is the administration that kept the promise after 23 years of lying by the Clintons, by the Bushes, by Obama, that the U.S. embassy would be moved to Jerusalem, and Jerusalem would be recognized as the eternal capital of the Israeli state. It was Donald Trump who actually made that happen, and he's the anti-Semite. It truly does cheapen the concepts of the Holocaust, of the deaths that were suffered, the Shoah, the 6 million people. It's the same accusation with regards to just bigotry or anti-Semitism. So this is the president that pardons a black grandmother. This is the president that pardons the heavyweight black boxer who really was charged as a result of a bigoted, trumped-up accusation.
yes.
And this is the man who's a racist. Somebody needs to tackle this issue head-on, because it is truly disgusting. It's more than a joke now, and it's fun to talk about Trump derangement syndrome. But any journalist who uses this argument is not a journalist. They are a rank propagandist.
Yes, and this is I'm glad you brought up Stephen Miller, by the way, who I've known since I was a teenager, and because we grew up at similar times in West Los Angeles. And I remember Politico that puts out virtually, it seems like on a weekly basis, at least one utterly dishonest hit piece on Breitbart. I remember they did an article on him where they said Stephen Miller, who called CNN's fake news Jim Acosta cosmopolitan, how that was actually an anti-Semitic epithet. The word cosmopolitan actually is anti-Semitic. So if you've got the media calling Stephen Miller anti-Semitic because he uses the word cosmopolitan, then anti-Semitism is now meaningless. And this is the problem with the left, is what they've done is they've minimized the Holocaust. They've minimized the gas chambers with this hysteria. And this is the thing that I'm wondering, Dr. G. And I have a feeling I know how you're going to come down. I'm very curious how Brandon's going to come down on this, but I'm wondering if we are getting towards the point where this will yet again backfire on the left, where the left has gone too far with their hysteria and it's going to be off-putting to people and think that, well, I don't know about that. If this makes them a Nazi, if they're getting pizzas and they're getting a prom night at the border, if that really is if the media is saying that, maybe I can't trust the media at all. Let me play a clip. This is Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen. Kirstjen, Kirstjen, my obsession in all of Washington, that she fit the J in there, or her parents did. Department of Homeland Security Secretary going to a restaurant I've been to one time called MXDC, a Mexican restaurant in the DC area, an upscale but not overly fancy joint, trying to have a meal. Let's play this clip, Mr. Paul.
And the separation and deportation of over 10,000 children separated from their parents. How can you enjoy a Mexican dinner as you're deporting and imprisoning tens of thousands of people who come here seeking asylum in the United States? We call on you to end family separation and abolish ICE!
Abolish ICE! Abolish ICE! Abolish ICE!
Abolish ICE!
Shame! 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 Shame!
Shame! Shame! Shame! Shame! Shame! Shame! Shame! Shame! Shame! Shame! Shame!
Brandon went from, and we cut it off. We get the point. But Brandon went from laughing so hard that he bumped into the microphone. He had to take off his headphones. He was so sick of this. They literally imply that she's not allowed to eat Mexican food. It's not real Mexican food. I mean, this is DC upscale. This is not actually what it's like if you went to Mexico and got food. I'm sure, Brandon, I'm sure you could attest. I'm sure it's not the same stuff. They're saying she shouldn't be allowed to eat Mexican food because of what's going on right now. How is this possibly helping the cause of open borders and left-wing globalism, Dr. G?
Okay, let's be honest here. On the one hand, we can laugh and try and make light of it. But I think, if somebody had had a tape recorder back then, I think that's the kind of behavior, that's the noise that you would have heard in the beer halls of Munich in the 1930s.
Yes, that is dehumanizing.
Yeah, it's dehumanizing. This is the left today, and just let's compare the consequences. James Hodgkinson is a name nobody knows today, but James Hodgkinson is the man who went to a baseball diamond not far from where we are today, with a rifle, with a handgun, and with a list of all the Republican congressmen he wanted to assassinate, and he almost achieved in killing Steve Scalise. So we don't have that on the right. We don't have the hatred and the dehumanization lead to left-wing activists like Hodgkinson, who was a Bernie supporter, actually leading to the attempts at political assassination. The right doesn't do that. We don't scream at left-wing icons at restaurants. And this is what I'm worried about, that they are normalizing I think Brandon nailed it. It's the dehumanization. When you dehumanize members of your society, fellow Americans, very, very dark things can ensue.
Yeah, and this is why the left had a movement just a year or two ago, how it's okay to punch Nazis. Literally, it's okay to be violent against Nazis. And if guys like Breitbart and Trump and Dr. Gorka, if we're all Nazis, then it is going to lead to violence. And I've been voicing this for a very long time. And again, people, if the shoe was on the other foot,
Alex,
yeah.
let me be clear here. It's not just that. It's not just that. So if you read anything I've ever said about Israel, about the Jewish people, if you read the first chapter of my book, Defeating Jihad, you find out how my parents suffered under fascism, how my father protected his fellow Jewish classmates as a 14-year-old in Budapest, escorted them to school to stop them being spat on and beaten up by the Nazi occupational forces. And I'm the Nazi. It's not just the labels they use, it's the utter contempt for reality and the truth. And this is where totalitarian comes from. And I'm not trying to be Chicken Little here, but totalitarianism, whether it's left-wing, right-wing, whether it's jihadi, begins by denying objective truth. And when my end state justifies all means, whether it's shouting at somebody in a restaurant or whether it's saying I get to punch somebody who's not actually a Nazi, but he's an anti-Nazi, but I don't like him, that way leads perdition.
Brandon.
No, I agree 100% that it's a dehumanization. We saw this, we saw this during the last administration. We saw this against law enforcement officers. Now we see it. So basically anyone who believes in rule of law, anyone who believes in borders, who believes in national security is somehow a Nazi, somehow less than, somehow not deserving of basic human treatments. It's one thing to say that person's an animal, that person is not a human being, but a more subtle way to do it, which is actually more damaging, is to say, let's not say that, but let's not afford that person the treatment that human beings deserve.
Yeah, and this is something that maybe I'm laughing because it's so commonplace to me. I remember I would give speeches at Berkeley, and I get shouted down before I open my mouth. People who are probably unfamiliar with me because who were protesting simply because of whatever group I was affiliated with at the time, they wouldn't listen at all. They would shout you down. They'd call you a racist. So it's all sort of old hat to me, but maybe I shouldn't dismiss it as this sort of a trifle. It really is something that could potentially be a very bad trend and move towards totalitarianism should the left ever get control back of the government. But Brandon, that's the question I want to ask you, is that do you think it'll work? Do you think that this will bring about a cave from the president? What does a cave even look like? And potentially, does this actually gin up support for the resistance?
Well, I mean, again, it depends on where people go. Like I said, I've said for a very long time, there's a humanitarian argument for border security, and I wish that the president made that argument.
Sure.
And I don't think he does. And yes, we can find one-offs where John Kelly made a comment or the president made a comment, but the overall impetus of what he's saying is not that. He should say that. He would do well to say that. This was an argument I used to have with Steve Bannon all the time, is that I want to focus on the humanitarian argument. Bannon didn't always want to. And you can see that. And I was given the freedom to do that, and other people given the freedom not to on Breitbart's pages. But it ultimately, it just depends on how the right plays this. If the right plays it by doing what Lauren Lewandowski did yesterday, womp womp, that is not helpful. That is not going, and I'm not knocking him. I'm just saying that's not helpful. That's not going to advance any arguments. Doing things that make us look cold and calculated and evil while people are calling us Nazis and saying we're cold and calculated and evil.
Yeah, not helpful.
Is not helpful.
Yeah.
Like there is a loving way to make these arguments. And still make the same exact arguments and do so in an honest way.
Okay, Brandon, we'll pick that up after the break. While we have Dr. G, I have to get his comment on some big news, I think, for the MAGA national security agenda. Mr. Paul, could we play clip 2A? This is UN Ambassador Nikki Haley yesterday.
For too long, the Human Rights Council has been a protector of human rights abusers and a cesspool of political bias. Regrettably, it is now clear that our call for reform was not heeded. Human rights abusers continue to serve on and be elected to the Council. The world's most inhumane regimes continue to escape scrutiny. And the Council continues politicizing and scapegoating of countries with positive human rights records in an attempt to distract from the abusers in their ranks. Therefore, as we said we would do a year ago, if we did not see any progress, the United States is officially withdrawing from the UN Human Rights Council. In doing so, I want to make it crystal clear that this step is not a retreat from human rights commitments. On the contrary, we take this step because our commitment does not allow us to remain a part of a hypocritical and self-serving organization that makes a mockery of human rights.
I mean, this is just such an amazing moment. I'm not world's biggest Nikki Haley fan. I think there's some things she does that I disagree with. But this is holding a corrupt global institution like the UN, and particularly the Human Rights Council, accountable is a moment you have to savor, Dr. G.
Yes, and especially because, again, this is a superb illustration of left-wing lunatic narrative versus reality. So this is supposed to be, the Trump administration is supposed to be the bigoted, anti-Semitic administration, right? And what have we just seen happen? We've seen the Trump administration decide to withdraw itself from this outrageous organization, the UN. Why? Because it has lambasted Israel more times than all the other members of the United Nations combined. So because of their incredible anti-Semitic behavior with regards to Israel, we in protest leave the commission. So again, there's truth, and then there's the left-wing insanity. And I more power to her elbow. We need to be seeing more of this happen at the United Nations, and this is who the Trump administration is.
So, Brandon, do you think the UN Human Rights Council has done enough for the actual humanitarian issues that are facing the planet right now, or do you think they're largely about self-serving, condemning Israel, condemning the United States, and pushing this sort of globalist, totalitarian leftist agenda?
I mean, there's a lot I appreciate about the United Nations. There's stuff when it comes to disease, there's a lot of data I appreciate getting from them. But when it comes to the Human Rights Council, no, I don't what I see is an overly focused on Israel. I think the over focus on Israel is for geopolitical reasons.
Yes.
And to me, we're a sovereign nation. We're a powerful nation. And I don't know that we really, I've kind of wondered for a long time, why we do as much with the United Nations as we do, considering their interests are different than I think what our national interests are.
Yeah, I think that's on the money. Dr. Gorka, I wish we had more time. Next week, I'll get caught up with you on what's happening in the Far East, which continues to be interesting developments there. But I think it's going to be a little more of a drawn-out process. But always appreciate your wisdom. Pick up the new book, Why We Fight, available. You can get for pre-order now, and also check out Dr. G all over the social web. Anything else to plug, Dr. G?
No, just follow me on Twitter at Seb Gorka, and keep on following the writings of Brandon, John Hayward, Francis Martel, and keep fighting the good fight. Like Andrew said, we need to be happy warriors.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Sebastian Gorka, the one and only.